I want to start off by saying my name actually means the one in awe. And I rarely think about that or rarely share that. Thanks for having me reflect on that. And I've been in awe of the last 3 talks and very appreciative to have a little time to share with you some of my journey. So how many of you have actually seen Sir Ken Robinson's joyful TED Talk called Do Schools Kill Creativity? Wow, a bunch of you. So you know that talk, a year after, he gave it 4 years ago, and a year after that it had already 5 million downloads. And then he was invited back 4 years later to give another TED Talk, and guess what he did? He just started off where he left off on his last talk. Brilliant. So just like Sir Ken Robinson, I too did a TED Talk. Well, it wasn't really a TED Talk, it was a TEDx. And I too, just like Sir Ken Robinson, want to start off just where I left off from my last talk. And you know what? I checked right before coming here. It has over 2,000 views. I'm actually pretty sure that everyone in this room has watched it in preparation. But just in case, I thought I'll start off by telling you my last line from my TEDx. It said, I'm a student, I'm an educator, and I'm a parent too. I look forward to being the change. So let me tell you how that's going for me. I'll start off with the parent part, right? So I have 2 daughters, the older one, Zelia. I was putting her to bed a couple of weeks ago, and she said, Baba, which means dad in Bengali, what's a job that I could do that pays really well, but that doesn't require a whole lot of work, and it can't be too boring? So I said, Zelia, you know, that's a good question. That's a good question. But an even better one is, what's the impact that you want to make in your life? So Zelia rolled her eyes and said, good night, Dad. So, you know, at this stage, Zelia thinks that social impact work is low pay, is a lot of work, and is not on the pathway to happiness. And frankly, that's something that keeps me up at night. The idea of how can I be a better parent? How could I parent differently? So let me now update you on how I'm doing as an educator, because I have a little bit more time for that. And I want to start off with a confession. I wasn't always an educator. In fact, if you caught me 20 years ago, I was wearing a gray suit, and I was in a cubicle in San Francisco. I was working as a management consultant. And thankfully, a conversation that I had with my childhood best friend, who I hadn't seen for many years, helped me realize that I really wasn't living anything close to my why or my calling. And I made the change and left management consulting. This is my childhood best friend now at his wedding a few years later. So I left management consulting in the summer of 1998 as a 25-year-old and head off to Ecuador to become a high school physics teacher. Why Ecuador? I actually have an undergraduate degree in industrial engineering, so I'm not licensed to teach in the US. But there was the school in Ecuador looking for a physics teacher, so perfect opportunity. So now I was on my pathway to happiness. But very soon into my new career as a physics teacher, I realized that I was stuck teaching facts and formulas to teenagers who just had to take physics to graduate. They had a lot of stresses that I could perceive in their lives. Everything from fitting in to, you know, what am I going to do with my life after high school? And I didn't feel that I had the curriculum to have the kind of impact that I had visualized myself having on students when I became an educator. I really longed for a curriculum that not only dealt with content, but was also relevant to their lives and gave them some of the skills to find well-being. So at this age of 25, I came up with a question. And this is my question: what knowledge, skills, and values are really important for my students to acquire? And frankly, as an Indian teaching in Ecuador, I didn't feel like I could impose my values on them. Unknown to me, at this very moment, there was a global consultation going on. No other global consultation has had such a process. The process was trying to answer this very question. It resulted in the year 2000 in a document called the Earth Charter. And this document is worth its weight in gold. It's just 4 pages long. You can download it in 57 different languages. And I just want to share with you a brief quote from the Earth Charter as it responds not only to this question, but has really influenced me as an educator. And it's this idea that we must realize that when basic human needs have been met, human development is primarily about being more, not having more. Now, while this quote has been influential in my personal journey, it's also something that keeps me up at night. Because unpacking what it means to be more, not have more, is quite complex. So 2 years after teaching high school, I decided to go to grad school and finally get a degree in education. And I came not far from here. I was at the Graduate School of Education at Harvard studying about educating in the 21st century. What are the possibilities of educating in an increasingly interconnected world? But it was a class that I took actually at the business school that had the biggest impact on me. It was called Effective Leadership of the Social Enterprise. This was back in 2001. And it was a case-based course. A lot of the cases, the guest speakers came into class, and these are people who told stories about a frustration or a problem that they've been facing, similar to what we've heard today, and how they've converted from that place of trial and tribulation, and they've built organizations that are sustainable and having a positive impact on these issues. I was inspired. I saw in these people that they were living their calling. They were present. I stayed after class often to talk to them about their life journeys. So that course really impacted me, and I want to kind of also refer to something I read in the same year. It's a book by Jim Collins called Good to Great. And some of you may have seen this framework. It came out in 2001. It's called the Hedgehog Concept. And Jim Collins talks about finding the intersection of what you are deeply passionate about, what you can be best in the world at, and what drives your economic engine. In other words, what pays the bills, right? And that intersection is the hedgehog. It's finding the thing that you're supposed to do. And I realized that these guest speakers, they had found their hedgehog, and I was determined to find mine too. So looking for my hedgehog took me to a place where hedgehogs usually don't hang out. It took me to Costa Rica and the University for Peace. Why Costa Rica for the University for Peace? Well, Costa Rica is a country that actually, anyone here been to Costa Rica? Just curiosity? Okay, a number of you have. It's a country that abolished its army more than 50 years ago. It's also a country that's dedicated to sustainability. So it became the host for this University for Peace that was started back in the 80s by the United Nations. And the university's motto is to educate leaders who can change the world. And my proposal to the University for Peace is, let me start a center for you that allows you to take your graduate programs and offer it in more flexible format. So I started a center that offers a diploma in social innovation, both in person and online. And in fact, a lot of what we do now is partner with universities across North America to allow for short-term immersion programs in Costa Rica around the themes of social innovation. 10 years have flown by. I started this back in 2006. And when I look back on the field of social innovation education, there's just been a growth in that field. I think this conference is a testimony to that. But I've also seen that there's a growing need for something else. I've seen it in my students, I see it in my daughters, and I see it in myself. It's the need to really understand what it means to be happy. And not my favorite term, but let's talk about well-being or flourishing. And it's not a need that I personally have just been seeing. If you look at any survey on mental health issues across US college campuses, issues like anxiety and depression leading to dropout are staggering. On the flip side, there have been a growing number of courses on the field of positive psychology. I think a course at NYU that was offered on the science of happiness had 450 people enroll in that elective. Yale also offered a course it was titled something different, but basically on happiness. It had 1,200 students. Never before had Yale had a course with as many participants. Stanford offers a course called Designing Your Life to its seniors that enrolls about 20% of its population. Back in 2006, I didn't know what positive psychology was. And today, I think in the last decade, there's been a lot that's been published, very accessible research around this field. And I want to share with you maybe one person who is Dr. Martin Seligman and his framework for the 5 elements that he sees to be central to whether it's well-being and he prefers the term flourishing. And it's these 5 things. It's positive emotions. It's engagement, which is knowing your strengths and using them in work and life. It's the idea of positive relationships. It's meaning, that your life matters beyond yourself. And the last one, but it's achievement. It's the sense that you're getting better at things that matter to you. Now, what actually, I've told you about a lot of things that keep me awake at night, but what really has been energizing for me in the last few years is to realize how many of these elements and how intrinsically PERMA is actually integrated into the life and journey of a social entrepreneur and into the field of social innovation education. So to me now, teaching about social innovation is just as much about going from an idea to launch and building a team and getting funded as the mindset. And I just want to do a quick mapping. So positive emotions, the idea of starting with a problem or a frustration and doing a positive reframe of that and building a solution. The idea of engagement, there are so many tools to be able to assess our strengths and then to build cross-disciplinary teams where individual weaknesses become irrelevant. The idea of relationships, whether in building teams or all the stakeholders we manage, empathy and relationships are central to the journey of a social entrepreneur and to the field of social innovation education. Meaning, of course, is at the heart of it and is captured in the mission statement. And finally, achievement is measured. There's in fact a whole track on measuring and evaluation because it's so complex. It's not measured in financial terms, which is just a means to an end, but achievement in the social enterprise is measured in lives impacted. So that takes me back to my daughter Zelia, talking about impact and finances. You know, I'm actually, after this conference, I've just spent a half a day here, but I feel very optimistic about the possibilities for her in higher ed, the possibilities for her to pursue of the field of social innovation and to find work that's meaningful. Though as a parent, I do want to say of a middle schooler that there's many more opportunities throughout K-12 to integrate social innovation education. So I just want to kind of pull together a few things for myself. The frameworks I've shared, the Earth Charter, which was one of the powerful ones for me, as was Jim Collins, as was PERMA, they recently came together for me in a 6-word sentence. This was an activity that I was encouraged to do at a workshop in just a couple of minutes. So I'd encourage you too to take, and not right now, but just a couple of minutes to think about what is your 6-word sentence. But these 6 words, learn and teach what I love, helped me integrate in a lot of these different frameworks that have continued to help guide my journey. And this has given me permission in the last few years to really develop curriculum and materials in this space of linking positive psychology with the journey of a social entrepreneur. So, last thing, last night, again, I was awake at night. And this time, I'm sure none of you have ever experienced this, but it was a familiar visitor to me. It was self-doubt. Crept in my room and said, Mohit, you know, what if these ideas of happiness and social innovation are you don't even have a degree in psychology. What do you know about this to do a big ideas talk? And so I reached out to my old friend Ken Robinson. I said, Ken, help me out here. And he said, Mohit, don't worry, just end with this quote. If you're not prepared to be wrong, you'll never come up with anything original. Thank you.